So my name is Chris Smith. I run a small non-profit called the Utopian Seed Project. We've been going for about 5 years now, and basically we're based in Western North Carolina, and we're aiming to increase the amount of agrobiodiversity both grown and consumed in the region. We're doing that with a lot of seed crops and seed work, but also with crop diversity. So a lot of this session is going to focus on how and what types of crops we can grow in this region that maybe haven't been grown before. Certainly not new crops. We haven't discovered anything new at all. Most of these crops we're talking about today are like ancient crops. They just haven't been traditionally grown here. So we're going to get a little bit into why it's important to bring in crop diversity at the beginning, and then we're going to dive into lots of specific examples of all the different things that we can and maybe should grow in this region, and I've got some show and tell to pass around as we go along. So a little bit of the grounding, a few quotes to kind of ground us in where we are and what we're doing. And actually for folks that were in my seed class, a lot of the justifications for diversity are the same, whether we're doing genetic diversity on a variety level, varietal diversity within a food system, or crop diversity, which is what we're focusing on today. So this one quote from a paper written about resilient food systems in North Carolina covers a lot of the same ground. We're just going to focus in on one part of that. But I'll read out the whole thing because I think it's powerful. Diversity in food production can be considered on 3 levels. Genetic diversity as reflected in the range of cultivars which can be selected for production. So that's like, why can we only ever buy one part of green okra that's the same across the entire country? Why can't we explore the thousands of varieties available? The next one is species diversity captured through production of a wide range of crops on each farm. So that's what we're focusing on today, is why is everyone growing the same thing? Why do supermarkets have a limited amount of crop diversity when there's so much that could be eaten and grown in this region? And then she also talks about broad ecosystem diversity, described by the diversity of production between farms and within the broader food system. So we're not really going to get into that today, but again, diversity, different types of production systems to have resiliency within the system is what that one's talking about. So reasons why this is important. This is the big one for me, or at least the one that should make us wake up and pay attention. The Food and Agricultural Organization wrote about 5 years ago now, the range of crops grown across the globe is severely limited. According to the FAO's State of the World's Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture, there are 20,000 edible plant species out there, so that's a lot. 6,000 of which have been historically used for food, but in 2019, fewer than 200 made a major contribution to food production, and only 9 crops are used for 2/3 of all food production. So out of a potential of 20,000, 66% of our calorific intake across the world comes from just 9 of those crops. So that speaks to the sheer magnitude of industrial agriculture, and in my humble opinion, the stupidity of humanity, that we've managed to get ourselves into this bottlenecked place where all of our food is coming from such a narrow genetic base. And that has impacts on actually health, environment, and all these other things. So we're trying to kind of like go in the opposite direction. We're trying to open that back up and bring in way more crop and variety diversity. Reasons why that's important from a few bigger organizations. National Geographic wrote, the International Food Policy Research Institute projects that by 2050, suitable croplands for 4 top commodities, corn, potatoes, rice, and wheat, will shift, in some cases pushing farmers to plant new crops. It is reasonable to assume that we will see similar shifts for other market crops. The article concludes that the winners, researchers say, will be farmers who modernize their methods and diversify their fields. So that's basically saying that with a changing climate, we're going to have a changing food system to keep up with that changing climate. And what we know and grow today, we may not be able to grow tomorrow. So a big underlying theme of this particular focus area of the Utopian Seed Project in terms of bringing in tropical crops is understanding that we are experiencing both a chaotic climate but also a warming climate, and it might be prudent to look to crops that are grown further south from us as staple crops and start working out how we can integrate them into our food system today, both from a grower's perspective and a consumer's perspective, so that we don't get to a point in 10 years, 15 years, where we're like, oh, like we have food systems collapse and we've got nothing to step into that void. Like, let's start building out new food system models today. And then Union of Concerned Scientists says similar things really. Climate change is an increasing threat to growing food, with severe weather events causing more regular farm and crop devastation in the south. In addition, a warming climate will leave some conventional crops less viable and fuel greater disease and pest pressure. So that pest and disease pressure is kind of important here, because we've got a recent history of agriculture attempting to highly modify our environment to make crops work. And so what I fear and probably predict is going to happen is that as it gets harder and harder to grow these crops that we're used to eating, we're just going to go, okay, well, if there's more pests and diseases, then let's get more pesticides and fungicides to continue to grow those crops. And we'll just keep putting more chemical solutions into the system so that we can continue the status quo. It's much harder to innovate outside of the status quo because it disrupts the system, and people don't like a disrupted system because people that are currently winning in that system then lose out. So if we're actually going to change the system to have like more sustainable environmental impact over time, then we actually need to have like total paradigm shifts. So introducing new crops to this region is one way that we can just say, let's ditch that one and move to this one. And to be honest, there's going to be transition and there's going to be a little bit of both, but I would like to have, our tagline or the way we summarize it is like crop options for a changing climate is where we're going. And I'd like those crop options to not be chemical intensive crop options. And so when we see crops that are able to grow in the tropics, in high humidity, high disease, high pest pressure environments, then they are natural choices to bring into our environment and be able to grow them in a sustainable way. Okay, so that's just some heavier grounding stuff to begin with. What I really want to spend most of the presentation on is like exploring the crops. There's like, I feel like each one of these crops could have their own hour and a half at least presentation behind them. So on some levels we're going to stay fairly surface here, but there are some that are like really working for us and I feel like could already be a part of the food system. So we might go a little bit deeper on a few of them. And if people have specific interests, we could divert a little bit. But I want to cover a broad terrain, give you an impression of the total potential that we could be moving towards, and then hopefully inspire you to go off and do your own explorations. And on that same idea, a lot of this is in the experimental phase. Like, I'm not saying like we have mastered how to grow cassava in this region, actually not even close to cassava. Other ones we feel fairly confident that a farmer could grow and make money selling. So there's a whole range here, and really I don't want this shift in agrobiodiversity in our kind of local food system to be a Utopian Sea Project centric initiative, right? I've always wanted it to be a big community push, and maybe we are doing the initial experiments and developing some of this germplasm to share out, but I want more people to be growing it, more people to be feeding back to it, so it's not just me telling folks how to grow taro, it's a whole group of people discussing the challenges of growing taro in Western North Carolina and working it out together so we can shift the whole system as a whole. So I guess that's an open invitation for this presentation, just to maybe open some doors or a little bit of inspiration ideas and get more folks involved. Yes, no?
I think one of the biggest issues when you introduce new crops is to new people. Like taro is grown in Southeast Asia and Hawaii, and they have a food history culture with it. People here might not know how to turn it into food, or all these other crops. How do you turn it into food? Maybe just as big of an issue as agriculture.
That is, I 100% agree. Yes, it's definitely not just an agronomic question. It's also, there's demand and supply, right? And 100% understand and work in that direction. We describe it as like a multi-stakeholder approach to shifting the food system, where we need to engage every stakeholder in the food system to be successful with introducing a new crop. And that's not just persuading a farmer to grow it, it's also persuading somebody to eat it, and we need both to happen at the same time. And actually that is one of the biggest challenge isn't persuading a chef that eating taro is delicious, because that's an easy sell. And it's actually pretty easy to persuade a farmer to grow it because it's easy to grow. The challenge is like balancing the model so that we're matching the demand and the supply at the same time. Because if a farmer grows a whole row of taro and there's no one to buy it, then that's problematic. And if you get a chef excited about taro and they can't put it on their menu because there's nowhere to buy it, then that's a problem. So that really is our biggest challenge with this. And so what internally as the Utopian Seed Project, we do a lot of outreach events. We have a trial to table food series where we showcase these crops at events. We do cooking demos. You know, there's a lot of moving pieces, and we're trying to engage everybody at the same time. But I appreciate you putting that out. So, oh yeah, tropicals. I want to jump forward and introduce this idea from something you probably all already know. To be recognized what that crop is? Sweet potatoes? Yeah, so that's, you know, one of our board members, Jan Fishman, curates a lot of sweet potatoes. That's actually about 100 different varieties of sweet potatoes that she's growing. So a lot of beautiful diversity in that field, a lot of sweet potatoes in that field. And I like starting with sweet potatoes because to the average person living in North America, when you talk about sweet potatoes, they wouldn't immediately think tropical perennial. They just think, you know, this is something that we get a sweet potato, and maybe if you're starting your own slips in, you know, maybe about now you start waking up your sweet potatoes. In a couple of weeks, if you give this a bit of heat and humidity, it'll start sprouting. You get little buds and they sprout, and you get little slips growing out. Then you snip them off, put them in soil, and they form roots, and then that's a new sweet potato plant, which will grow more sweet potatoes. And then you'll store the sweet potatoes over the winter and do the same thing next year, right? So we grow it as an annual. We plant it in the spring, we harvested it in the fall. It's standard, you know, no one's gonna think you're crazy for growing sweet potatoes in this region. But the reality is that this is a tropical perennial that came from tropical regions. In frost-free regions, it doesn't die back to the ground. It just continues to vine and root and produce and vine and roots. And it might have some human control whether they'll dig it up and store it or plant it in different places, but this has all the characteristics of a perennial in the tropics where it doesn't experience a frost. But it's been in North America and grown as a temperate annual for so long that we don't even think about its origins anymore. We're just like, we've adapted it into our system, and it's, you know, people grow it, people consume it, it's not a strange or unknown crop. So there's lots of crops that have kind of crossed over that barrier, and what we're trying to do with these crops is get them to a stage where we think about them like we think about sweet potatoes, like not strange or weird. We've just got slightly different growing techniques for these in the temperate regions where we live, instead of the tropical regions where they're endemic to. So with the sweet potatoes, there's kind of a word of caution here. One is we seem to have a tendency to go towards monoculture, even in our smaller farming systems. So that's back to the same idea that like everyone's growing Clemson spineless okra. Most sweet potatoes, despite there being hundreds of varieties and lots of colors, then, you know, the main thing we have access to, certainly through the industrial food system, is like Covington and Beauregard, and then occasionally you get access to Murasaki. You know, there's just not a lot of diversity. There's certainly not hundreds of varieties available out there. So we tend to, once we've learned to grow a crop in our region, we for some reason narrow down to hyper uniformity instead of continuing to explore varietal diversity. So we'll come back to that with some of these crops, but stage 1 is learning how to grow it. Stage 2 is then to do varietal exploration so that we can have lots of different choices within that crop type and not just kind of stop at one variety that works. I've got some examples of that already happening. Okay. This is just the sweet potato process that I was explaining before, where the technique that they don't need to do in the tropics that we do need to do here is slipping out the sweet potato. So a lot of the work we do is just working out what are the production differences we need to do here that nobody talks about in the tropics. Because again, most of these crops are well known across the world in various places. And there's lots of academic research behind that, there's lots of agronomic research behind that. But if you go and read a paper on cultivating taro in Hawaii, then it just doesn't apply here. I've spoken to taro farmers in Hawaii that have told me that taro, you can't store taro. Taro doesn't store for more than a couple of weeks. And we have taro that we dug out of the ground last October, and it's here. But like there's just no, because you don't need to store taro in Hawaii. The production practice in Hawaii is to dig up your taro for market, and on the same day, slice off the top, the growing section, and put it back in the ground, and it'll grow a new taro plant. That's the practice. Same with cassava. They'll dig up the cassava, hack off a bit of the stem, stick it right back in the ground, because it never freezes. And so all the information about growing taro and cassava follows that practice, and it just doesn't apply to us here. So part of the work is just to work out slightly different practices for growing. And again, we've done that with sweet potatoes successfully, and we're learning how to do it with these other ones. Okay, we're going to get into each of these different roots, but I think, okay, so even though there's quite a lot of different things I'm going to try and introduce you to here, I do want to acknowledge that we're still like barely scratching the surface of all the things that are out there. Remember that 20,000 different edible species. Obviously they're not all tropical species, but a lot of tropical species, and we're just working with the ones that we've either randomly had access to, had like friends that were already beginning to experiment with these. A lot of immigrant communities are already leading the charge in this world. So we've got like a Hmong community just outside of Asheville that's growing chayote and taro. There's a Burmese community in the Triangle area that's growing a lot of these crops. So, you know, working with those communities to support that work. But yeah, there's way more to go at. So the way we work with the Utopian Seed Project is that we have a kind of like throw it at the wall and see if it sticks approach, where we just try a lot of things, and then usually we'll give it a year or two, and if it seems to be working fairly easy, we'll lean into that and grow it. And in my head I give it like a traffic light system that's like a green light, we should definitely be running with it. I give it an amber light if it's like either got a lot of food systems potential or it's really easy to grow. Then I'm like, okay, let's work with it and see if we can get it up to green light level. But there's definitely some challenges there. And then there's some things that I've grown for a couple of years and just either really struggled with, or I really can't find a way to get it into the food system, or that type of thing, and I give that a red light. And that's not to say, that's not necessarily a judgment on the crop itself, that's a judgment on my ability to grow and work with that crop, given all my limitations. So that's the kind of triage that we give these crops, and obviously trying to put more resources into getting the green light crops out there. So I'm going to start with some of the success stories and spend my most time speaking about some of these crops, and then we'll cover some of the other ones that we've either struggled with or just aren't working for us towards the end. Okay, before I actually talk about turmeric, what I think is helpful, because I know what happens straight away, is we start getting how do I grow it questions. And I have a kind of like a tropical root crop general practice that I apply to most root crops. So I'll give you my overview of like growing any tropical root crop, and then as we get into each crop type, we'll do some we'll pull out some nuances or slight differences or that type of thing. So in general, with all of these root crops, I've found some way to store them over the winter, and about now's a perfect time where I go through this phase where I think about waking them up. So I'm storing them dormant, but then I want to start waking them up. And sometimes you can see it. I got sugarcane here, and it's telling me it's waking up because it's literally sprouting, right? So definitely waking up that one. And we've got this one here, which again is literally sprouting, but some things are a little bit more nuanced in that people have probably grown turmeric, but it just, the buds start swelling, so you can just see them starting swelling, and you know that that's going to sprout soon. So the waking up phase is taking them out of storage, giving them a little bit of heat, sometimes a little bit of humidity, sometimes a little bit of light, and just letting them know that it's time to, get rolling for the season. Some things are more predictable than others, like some things just are like, yeah, okay, a little bit of light and heat and I'm good to go. Other things are really kind of stubborn and they don't seem to follow a human schedule, but there's always that waking up phase. That often happens, inside or warm greenhouse. None of these things like to freeze. And that gets us through a couple of months when they're waking up, and we get to, May, which is our frost date. So once we get to frost date, they can be safe to go outside, last frost date. And basically, these guys can just be planted straight in the ground. Think about, it's like planting a potato, right? We just dig a hole and put the tuber in the ground, and then it finds its way to the light and grows, and then all the underground root production happens. And most of these are as easy as that. So then you just have vegetative growth throughout the season. If they're a root crop, they'll be doing all that stuff underground. Most of these crops want a longer season than we can offer them in Western North Carolina. So when you read the tropical stuff, it'll be like the growing time is 6 months to 9 months, 9 months to 12 months. Like they definitely want more time than we have to give them. So our general theory is to give them as much time as we possibly can. And for us, that actually, we leave them until the frost kills them. So October, sometimes early November if we're lucky, we'll just keep them in the ground until they literally won't grow anymore, and then we dig them up. And our theory there is just to give them as much time to yield as much as possible, knowing that if they had an extra 2 months, then we would get more yield, but we don't have that. So can we get enough yield that it makes sense to grow them in the time that we do have? And that's back to that traffic light system. Some things the answer is no, and that's sadly cassava. Every time we've grown that, we've had these beautiful, big, bushy plants that are literally like, they grow this far around and they can get this tall, so much beautiful vegetation. I've done it 3 years now, and every time I look at the plants and go, that is a beautiful, healthy plant. Surely there's gonna be a lot of cassava under the ground. And every time I dig it up and I get like finger width size cassava roots, and I kind of cry in the corner and despair cassava because it's so delicious and everybody wants it, and I would love to have Western North Carolina grown cassava, and we just never get more than like a couple of pounds of usable roots. So cassava, we're still working on cassava. I think it might be a varietal thing, but for whatever reason, the cassava we've tried growing just doesn't produce enough in our season. It really does need more time. But taro is producing like potato equivalent yields within the season that we do have. So it's producing 4 to 6 pounds per plant at equivalent row spacing, and so it becomes a very viable crop for this region. So we're just playing around and working out that data point. But they all follow that season. Wake up, plant out into the field, give them as much growing time as possible, dig them up, and store them. That's our cycle, with nuanced stuff in between. I will throw in one extra thing we've been playing with. The longer we work with some of these root crops, is some of them are proving to be more cold tolerant than we thought. Sweet potatoes, if you leave them in the ground over winter, they will 100% go to mush. They will not survive the winter. They're very frost sensitive. Actually, sweet potatoes, if the frost kills the vines of the sweet potato underground isn't happy and won't store as well, like it loses longevity. So sweet potatoes are like highly frost sensitive. A lot of these other crops don't seem to have that issue, and some of them are actually successfully overwintering in the ground. And so at that point, it's like, are they tropical perennials or are they actually temperate perennials? Taro is our strongest example of that. I've had a crop of taro in the ground that I've never dug up for 4 years now. So it got through the winter where we had -1 Fahrenheit, and it still regrew. So to my mind, that's a pretty perennial, not just a tropical perennial. So taro is super hardy. And some of the other ones are like, with mulching, they'll get through the winter. So turmeric will get through the winter with mulching. Yakon will get through the winter with mulching. Achira will get through the winter with mulching. So some of these crops, water chestnuts, you can freeze them in a bucket of water and they'll still resprout in the spring. So at this point, I'm thinking they're not, maybe they just enjoy the tropics, but they're not limited to the tropics. So when we're dealing with those crops, then we've started realizing that we can plant them way earlier in the season, more on a traditional Irish potato schedule. And that's been really kind of liberating, because instead of having this May window where literally everything needs to go in the ground, we can pull it forward to March. And if we've got open beds, we can be drilling holes that are about 8 inches deep and planting turmeric, taro, yakon deep in the ground. And then it doesn't emerge until late May, early June, but it's had a lot of root development. And when it finally pops up, no transplant shock, no heated greenhouse, and all that sort of stuff. It's just like root crop in the ground, pops up in May, June, and then it's good to go, and you get decent yields by the end of the season. So we've only begun playing with that in the last couple of years, but some opportunities, for sure.
Did you say they all survived the -1 or just taro?
Taro was the only one that I had in the ground over that winter. I think taro would... Yana, who is a little bit warmer than me, she's at like 1,500 feet. I think she overwintered Achira in that cold spell, but they didn't get quite as cold as I did. So I wouldn't say, but Achira is pretty tough as well. But definitely the taro. So then that gives you 2 planting options. You can either treat it kind of like a transplant crop that you do after the danger of frost, or you could treat it as a early seeded crop like you might do on a more of a potato schedule. And it does depend slightly on the crop, but it's nice to have that early option. And then more on a farm scale than a home gardener scale, we've kind of like paired that early planting like with landscaping fabric over the top. So we'll plant a row of taro in March, put landscaping fabric over the top, leave it there as a weed barrier until the end of May. So it'll have some soil warming effect, keep the weed pressure down, pull it back at the end of May. Taro is ready to pop up in warm soil and quickly shades out the weeds, and then it's a pretty nice passive way to manage the taro. The thing we haven't done yet, but I would love to do, is maybe go ahead and follow that kind of like Hawaiian schedule of digging it in October, replanting it in October, sowing a winter kill cover crop over the top, something like oats, and maybe a less cold tolerant pea, and have that grow as like over the top of the taro basically. Hopefully that would winter kill in March, and then the taro would grow up through the mulch in May, June. That's aspirational, not tested. If you give it a go, let me know. But that's the direction I'd love to take it.
Can you just say that sequence again?
For the cover crop? Yeah. Because we know that taro will overwinter, you could plant it as soon as you dig it up, and then you don't have to worry about winter storage. You just harvest it, keep as much as you want for food, and then plant your row. So then you plant it, say in October, still enough time to do a cover crop. So as long as it's a winter kill cover crop, then I think you'd be pretty safe to sow something over the top of it, let that grow through the winter and into early spring, hopefully it dies back, or you could kill it back in March, beginning of April, and then you'd have your green living mulch on top, or dead living mulch, you know what I mean, on top, and then the taro should sprout through May, June on its normal schedule with a weed suppressant barrier grown in place. So yeah, that's one aim we're going for. So with that general overview, then let's jump into crop specifics. Turmeric, I like starting with turmeric because I almost feel like we're almost already there with turmeric. How many people have grown turmeric? Yeah, so like if I'd asked that question even probably just 5 years ago, but certainly 10 years ago, then there would be very few hands in the air. So, you know, sweet potatoes already got there, turmeric and ginger. More recently, people are aware that they can grow it and how to grow it. There's some good research out there on turmeric. It's a crop that I feel like we don't actually need to do too much work on because it's already known and grown in the region. There are the few things that I like to talk about with turmeric is that this is one of the ones where farmers seem to have fallen into a bit of a trap where, one, there seems to be a myth that floats around that you can't grow turmeric from your own seed stock. And so a lot of people go back to Hawaii to source their ginger every single year. And there doesn't really seem to be a great reason to do that. There's some disease concerns around saving your own seed stock. But if you're paying attention to the health of the plant and you're not seeing diseased plants, then your rootstock shouldn't be any more diseased than it was when you started. So it's only if you start seeing plant disease that you should be worrying about rhizome disease. So saving your own seed stock, Jan has been saving her own turmeric for decades. We've been doing it since the project began for 5 years, and there's some evidence that even though when you grow turmeric, this is the plant I grew and I snap this off and plant it and grow more turmeric, then this is this is a clone of this plant. So there's no genetic diversity between these two plants, they're clones. But what we do see even in clonally reproduced plants is we see epigenetic adaptation. So the concept of regional adaptation still applies to clones, where even though the genetics are the same, the way the genome responds to the environment changes, and then that change is inherited. So we can have improvement over time by saving clonally reproduced plants over a period of time. And we've seen that in real, we've not proven it with peer-reviewed papers, but again, Jana, who's been growing the taro much longer than me, the first year she grew taro, it got like to this big, and then the next year it got this big, and I've got a picture later that now it gets like 6-7 feet tall, and it's just been like, yes, maybe we've learned how to grow it better, yes, maybe the environmental conditions have changed, but it also feels as if the plant is learning the place as much as the people is learning the plant, and that kind of coevolution over time I think is important as well. So there's some inherent benefits of saving your own turmeric in place because the turmeric will become stronger. And actually last year we bought some Hawaiian turmeric and we grew it with our regionally saved turmeric, and the Hawaiian turmeric was like this high and didn't seem very happy, and our turmeric was our normal like big vigorous plants. Again, not a replicated trial to really make any serious scientific claims, but anecdotally we see this over and over and over again in terms of regional adaptation. So the main thing I want to talk about turmeric is, one, you can save your own stock. All it really needs to go, we're harvesting the turmeric a little bit young than it would if it was allowed to complete its natural life cycle. So often the skin is pretty thin. It's like baby turmeric, baby ginger, but you can kind of just leave it in open air, well-ventilated space, and it cures and develops a skin over time. So if you allow it to develop a skin before putting it into storage, it stores just fine over the winter. In fact, I think it's one of the easiest root crops to store. We don't really give it much attention. As long as it's cool and dark and not too dry, it stores really well. It's kind of root cellar conditions, and it stays perfectly good over time. And then the other thing with turmeric is I wanted to share the varietal exploration. So we've got a beautiful green turmeric that I'll pass around. And then there's a blue turmeric, and we have a black turmeric as well. You can just pass them around to see them up close. So this is just like, let's not just stop at, like, we can grow turmeric and then everybody just grows the same Indira yellow or Jamaican red or whichever the varieties are that are out there at the moment. There's much more varietal exploration to be done. And in turmeric, there's hundreds of species of turmeric that can be grown. And here's just a few examples of the different ones. Ambrook Research is just an article about some of our work with turmeric. And again, like, varietal diversity, absolutely beautiful. And not just varietal diversity, these are different species of turmeric as well, so slightly different genetics in the food system is good for this diversity argument. There's that green one in the top left that we're passing around. And the foliage is slightly different as well. The greens and the blacks have a beautiful purple stripe down the middle of the leaf, so it's not just a straight green leaf. Okay, Yakon is one of our big crops that kind of like solid green light. We should already be growing it. So much so that it's been in demand that I don't actually have any good Yakon left to share with you. So I'm gonna pass around a pitiful Yakon. I don't want you to judge Yakon based on this, because usually they can be big, like a couple of pounds, and that they store really well, and they Peruvian ground apple, Bolivian sunroot they get called, because they can be eaten raw, and they're sweet and they're juicy and they're crunchy, and they're more like a fruit than a root, and just a very delicious crop. It's in the sunflower family. Just some different varieties. I want to find you a picture of the plant. So it grows like this. It kind of get pretty tall, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, between 4 and 6 feet tall, and it grows these little yellow flowers, like little baby sunflower. Flowers are all over it. So you kind of shrubby with all these multiple stalks, and then underground it grows. This is what you generally dig up in the fall. Is you dig up the whole crown, so the stalks are coming out the middle, and then around you've got all those storage tubers like what we're passing around, but usually bigger. And the storage tubers are what you eat. And one of the great things about Yakon as a crop is that those storage tubers cannot grow. There's no growth points on them. You could plant them, you could try and sprout them, they will not grow. So the only good thing to do with them is eat them, and they're tasty, so that's not a bad thing. The propagation material, and it's kind of like similar to dahlias, which are also in the sunflower family. The propagation material are these little propagules that live around the base of the crown. So you get the stalks coming up, you get a little internal ring of these propagation material, and then you get all the storage roots going off that. So you can pull all the storage roots off, and that's your food crop, and then you store the whole crown like you would a dahlia crown. And in the spring, in the waking up phase, you're just breaking off these little propagules, and they're sprouting, and then they have little leaves, and they're cute, and then you plant them outside, and you get your new Yakon plant growing. So it's easy to propagate, it produces abundant propagation material, it produces an abundant, tasty crop, and it's easy to grow. So it like checks all the boxes of like, there's plenty of food crops that we currently grow in this system that are harder and less productive than Yakon. So it's one we're really trying to push in. And actually it's one we're having success with. We had a farmer last year grow about 400 pounds of Yakon and reach out to us to help place it. And this is Noah's point of like, how do we get it into the food system? So we had just done one of our Chowder Table events where one of the chefs, we asked to do a Yakon pie because it's got such an apple-like taste and texture. Then I'd always had a dream of having an apple pie made with Yakon instead of apple. And he took on that project and made just this amazing Yakon pie, which was like crunchy and sweet and all the good stuff. We gave him some sorghum molasses and some sorghum seeds to put in the crust. So it was just this whole magical pie. And everyone loved that pie, obviously, how could you not? And then a couple of weeks later, this farmer reached out and was like, we grew 400 pounds of Yakon, what are we gonna do with it? And we're like, we know somebody that made an awesome pie. we connected the farmer with the chef, and now this is Chef Eric Morris at Cultura restaurant next to Funkatorium in downtown Asheville. You could go there this evening and order Yakon pie off the menu because the farmer was able to supply enough Yakon to the restaurant to put it on their menu as a seasonal dish. So that's like a real success story, and like we now can Yakon fully shift into the food system. There's demand, there's supply, it does all the right things. So that's kind of an example of what we're trying to do with all of these crops. And it's a fairly easy sell with Yakon just because it's so sweet and delicious. The other thing you can do with Yakon is juice it. So if you juice the roots, you get a lot of liquid coming out of it, and then you can boil that down and make a syrup. So it's a real thick, dark, kind of like more like molasses than anything. It's a great syrup. And this, I was trying to find a picture of that pie, but I couldn't find it. So you have to imagine this absolutely beautiful. Okay. Did I start at 2:30? Yeah, we've got time. I was like, Jesus. Water chestnuts. This one is an interesting one. I've got it in this like upper category, mainly because if you've ever eaten like a fresh water chestnut, it's kind of equivalent to that feeling people get when they eat their first homegrown tomato. It's just like you can never go back to eating store-bought tomatoes. Like a fresh water chestnut it's juicy, and it's kind of got a coconutty creaminess to it and a slight fruitiness. And it's just like, it almost melts in your mouth as it's just like amazing experience. Very different to the canned water chestnut experience that most people get to experience. So we started growing water chestnuts, and they are very easy to grow. They do need to be submerged in water. Let me pull up some photographs. So they grow underground. They're in the sedge family, so you get this kind of like sedge-like grass coming out the top. But what you can do is, we've grown them in those plastic kiddie pools, so about the size of this table, and we'll have the kiddie pool, they're only like 6 to 8 inches deep. So we'll fill the pool with maybe 4 to 6 inches of soil, and then just plant one single chestnut, water chestnut, right in the middle of that, and then fill it to the brim with water. They do like to stay wet. So they get away with soggy, but they're happier if it's fully wet. So we try and keep the whole thing submerged in water. And during the course of one season, that single water chestnut will sprout and spread. And if you know sedge as a weed, maybe, then it sends out like aggressive rhizomes all over the place. Or, not rhizomes, stolons all over. And so it spreads out and then shoots up all over the place, and the entire kiddie pool will be filled with grass-like weeds by the end, reeds by the end of the season. And so it's kind of cool. And then at the end of the season, you literally just tip that whole kiddie pool over, and what they seem to tend to do is they send out that root system, and when they hit the edge of the kiddie pool, that's where they form the water chestnuts. So if you went from the top down, you'd dig through like 5 or 6 inches of soil before you found anything, but by tipping it upside down, there'll be a dense mat of roots over the whole thing, and there'll be water chestnuts bedded in the whole thing. And if you happen to have a 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, you can like send them treasure hunting through, and it's like mucky and messy because they like growing in this like stagnant, smelly water, and they just like climb through, and it's just real mucky, but you end up with this like gold, which is the water chestnuts, and rinse them off, peel them, and then you can eat them straight away. So fun to grow, easy to grow, so far hard to scale. So we always have this like, we don't just want to create home garden novelties, nothing against home garden novelties, but if we want to have like food systems impact, we need to get it into the farm system. I've struggled to really think how to get these into the farm system. I think they could work in an aquaponic system, but I've not had a chance to make that happen. So we're maintaining them, we're growing them, we're sharing them, but some challenges, yeah.
When did you say you planted them in the pool or the soil?
We do that on the same cycle, so May, with no frost, they get killed by the frost and we plant them out. But these are the ones that have also, they will overwinter here, so they will naturalize. Yeah.
if you ever planted them along springs or creeks or anything like that.
Yeah, we once tried planting them around the rim of a pond and never saw anything. I think they're very tasty, not just to humans.
Everything wants to eat it.
Yeah. So I think they just got eaten.
But never along like a running creek or a spring. Have you tried anything like that?
I've not tried moving water, but they like messy, dirty water.
Stagnant.
Yeah, stagnant water. Not even like they like the stinky, muddy water. So I don't know if they would work along a creek side because they don't like clean water.
Wow.
The other thing with water chestnuts, in terms of the food system impact that's worth pointing out, is we give these pantry lists out when we do these events with chefs, and we list all the crops that we have available, and the chefs always get excited about the water chestnuts and pull them out, and we give them water chestnuts, and I've kind of started giving them with a warning now, because the first couple of chefs that took the water chestnuts epically complained about how much time it took to peel them off, because they're kind of they got little ridges in them, and you got to peel them with a knife, and they're tiny, and they were like, I love the water chestnuts, they taste delicious, and they were just like, it took me forever to peel them, and we got that feedback consistently. And so now if people want water chestnuts, I just say you can have them, but it takes a lot of time to peel. Question at the back.
Do you have issues with pests with that sitting water?
Say that one more time.
Do you have issues with pests with the sitting water?
Good question. That came up yesterday. We don't, mainly because, we would have pests if it wasn't for this wonderful invention called the mosquito fish, which I've been told by an old timer that the extension service around here used to go around people's rural neighborhoods, knocking on doors with anyone that had rain barrels and giving out little bags of mosquito fish. And they're basically like little black fish that are top feeders and breed voraciously. And so you can start off with 5 of them and then have 1 million of them, and they eat the larvae at the top of the water. So when I got water chestnuts from Yana, she gave me a bag of mosquito fish at the same time, and I put them in my pond, and now I have a pond full of mosquito fish. And so we're just in the habit now that whenever we share water chestnuts, we also share fish, and the fish control the mosquitoes. Question? No?
I guess this might defeat the purpose of your talk.
I'm gay.
There's lots of greenhouses. Do any of these crops make a viable greenhouse commercial crop?
Yes, I would imagine that if either through season extension or through heated greenhouses for sure, if you modify the environment enough, you can grow anything, anywhere, anytime. So yes, greenhouses would totally allow for the growing of any of these crops. As a more of a baseline sustainable philosophy, I'm not overly interested in showing that you could grow cassava in a heated greenhouse in Western North Carolina. I'm more interested in cassava being a core staple crop across the tropics, and can we grow it in open field conditions in Western North Carolina? That's where I personally see food system impact, because otherwise we're going to fall into a trap where taro becomes a high-end novelty crop that only rich white people can buy, and I want it to be like a crop, of the people, staple crop that can feed lots and lots of people in the community. So definitely it would grow better in greenhouses, but that's not the system I'm trying to work towards. So is my talk still viable? I can continue? Okay. So water chestnuts, intensive to use from a chef perspective, easy to grow, but maybe hard to scale. Obviously, systems are scalable in Asia because lots of water chestnuts are produced and exported. I assume there's a lot of mechanization involved, certainly on the peeling side of things. Little pretty water chestnut flower. Never found viable seed. Variety exploration, always once we've learned how to grow something, the next question will always be, okay, varieties. Okay, a big one for us is taro. We were lucky enough to get a 2-year on-farm research grant from Southern Sarre to go a little bit deeper in our taro explorations. I think, to be honest, if folks are here just to go like, I want to diversify my own garden or farm and I want to try something new or different, then Yakon and taro are the sure bets. Like, you can definitely grow them. Both of them, we've had farmers regionally growing them at scale. There's definitely plenty of food applications for them. Like, I would say they're good to go. I don't mind recommending them. Some of the other ones are a little more nuanced or experimental. Still encourage it, but like if you just want a solid crop to try this year, go taro or Yakon root. That was root with a U, not a double O. Sorry. So taro. Let me pass around some taro. I just grabbed random stuff from my basement and it was dark, so these aren't actually the best examples, but gives you an idea of what we're going. I'm going to pass around what are yours, Noah. So last year we produced enough taro that we're able to sell some as plugs through the Farm Connection in terms of trying to get this out there. Noah over here got some of that taro and grew it himself and has brought in some very healthy looking specimens. This is a variety called Korean taro. You can see that they're already sprouting. So if folks want to buy some taro from Noah, then he's selling them at $5 a piece. I'm going to pass one around just so you can see the sprouting side of it. And you know, they're already rooting out, so they do look healthy. And that can be between you and Noah over here, who brought some taro. Thank you for doing that. So the taro, again, a very ancient crop, like one of the earliest domesticated crops grown in many, many different regions of the world. One thing to kind of start with, just as a kind of a heads up, is taro can't be eaten raw. It's got calcium oxalates in all parts of the plant, the leaves, the stem, and the roots. And if you were to eat those oxalates raw, then it kind of gives you like a glass-like feeling, as if you swallowed crushed glass in your throat. It's not happened to me personally, but lots of people have told me about it, and I don't want to experience it personally. But when you cook the taro, then those oxalates are kind of like neutralized, and you don't notice that effect. So on one hand, that kind of like can feel scary to people, something new that could make my throat feel like I swallowed glass, not great. But on another side of things, taro is very equivalent to growing potatoes, and if you eat potatoes raw, you're also going to get sick. So, you know, none of us question having potatoes in our cupboard, having our kids learn to juggle with potatoes. Like we don't get scared about potatoes because we know them culturally. And so taro, in my mind, is the same. We just need to learn ways to engage with it and get used to it.
And how did you say it propagates?
Taro propagates from, I've got some pictures, and I'll pass this around. You can see the taro sprouting around the little edo from the one that Noah brought, and then I got a little cutting here, which is already starting to sprout. So one way people do it is, it's got the big mother plant, and most of that is good eating material, so you can just slice off the top, eat the bottom section, and then the top section will sprout, and then in time roots will come out as well. So I'll pass that around. So in taro's case, the thing that you eat is also the thing that you plant. But in general, and again, let me bring up a different picture. In general, you'll get a big central production that we call the mother that grows in the middle and the main stem grows out of. And then from that mother, you'll get lots of little babies. So the mother is often called the corm, and then you get the cormels around the base, or sometimes those little ones are called the edos. And so the little baby edos can be propagation material. You can save them for planting, and then the bigger ones are the ones that you can eat. So you get a mix that comes out. Again, like when you harvest sweet potatoes or potatoes, sometimes you get those big ones out, and you're like, that's definitely my food stock. And then the little ones can be propagation material. Or sweet potatoes, the little ones are the best ones for slipping, so you save them back and you eat the big ones. So you go through the same process in terms of grading your taro when you dig it. Taro, as we were talking about before, it does have this cold hardiness to it, so it gives us a few more planting options. You could plant it as a perennial bed. Now the thing is, if you allow it to perennialize over multiple years, you'll have the same thing that happens with if you let potatoes perennialize. You get crowding really quickly. Every one of those potatoes you leave in the ground will all sprout the next year, and then they'll all try to produce potatoes, and you just basically end up with lots and lots of little potatoes. So the main reason we dig up potatoes and store them and replant them is to get the spacing right so we can get the best yields from that bed. Same is true of taro. So what I've started doing in my taro growing is I have one bed which is my perennial bed, and that's my leaf production because the leaves are edible on this. And so that's really densely planted now. I've not dug that up for 4 years, and I get like sprouts all over the place, and I get lots of these small tender leaves, and I can just go in and snip leaves, and it keeps growing leaves, and that's my leaf production. But then my root production, I dig up every year, get everything out the ground, and then replant at about 12-inch spacing the following year. So 2 different tactics, one for leaf production and one for root production. The leaves also need to be cut. Yeah?
Is there a difference between like ornamental?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Growing?
Yeah, so you might notice that, oh, wrong direction. These leaves look like elephant ears. So elephant ears is the landscaping plant. The plant family is like Araceae, which is big and has a lot of crop types in it. Within that we have elephant ears, which is a common term that covers Colocasia esculenta, which is the taro we're talking about, but also some xanthosomas and other crop species. So the answer is, what's the answer? The answer is, on one hand, I've started eating landscaping taros just to see what's going on. And most of the, they're the same species, so they're edible, but they're going to have different levels of calcium oxalate, so I've cautiously been eating them. But what I've noticed, I've only tried a handful of them at this point, they're all the texture is mushy and not very good. So the oxalate thing hasn't been a problem. They just haven't tasted very good. But when you eat a culinary taro, it's kind of got a creaminess to it and sometimes a little nuttiness, and then it's you're like, oh, this is good food. And I'm not seeing that in the landscaping one. So I kind of abandoned my landscaping eating direction and just sticking with the known culinary types. There's over 100 different taros grown, culinary taros grown in Hawaii, so I don't feel limited by my options. So yes, some of them are the same, but I wouldn't worry too much about them from a culinary perspective.
Also, what do you do with the leaves?
Usually my first stop is to just ask which cultures are using the leaves and then copy them. And so, or actually even better now that we've got the project, find a chef that represents that culture and get them to cook it because they do amazing things. So we've got a friend, two friends from Ghana. One is Zoe Ajonyo and then Awu Amenyume are 2 Ghanaian chefs that have cooked for us. And one of them did a dish called Inkontomere, which is a taro leaf stew basically with tomatoes and peanuts and spices, and just was mind-blowingly good. And then my other Zoe she had me peel all the stems. So she got all the stems and we peeled them all and sliced them up into kind of like a peanut taro stem stir-fry thing. That was also very good. So usually soups and stews seems to be the direction that folks go in with the leaves traditionally. Yeah.
Have you worked on any of the relatives that are supposed to be there?
Yeah, good question. So the main relative to taro, Colocasia esculenta, is Xanthosoma sagittifolia. And there's actually a little bit of common name confusion as happens. You can broadly think of Colocasia esculenta as old world taro coming out of Asia and then spreading across the tropics. So that's what we're working with ourselves, there's something that's sometimes called New World taro, which is the Xanthosoma, which is native to the Central America region. And so now there's like a crossover mix where in the Caribbean, you'll see both Colocasia taro, which is technically Asian origin, and you'll see New World taro, which is slightly different. And depending who you speak to, or which island they're from, or which country they're from, then you just get into that whole common name mess. But like malanga, yautia, taro, cocoa yam, there's lots of different names for this, both the same thing, and maybe sometimes it's Xanthosoma and sometimes it's Colocasia. In the tropics, it doesn't seem to matter. They seem to have a lot of crossover in culinary use. Here in Western North Carolina, we've had a lot of success growing the Colocasia. We've had very minimal success growing the malanga, the Xanthosoma. We get good vegetative growth, but we rarely get more root mass back than we put in the ground originally. So for some reason, I assume it needs a longer season than we have, or there's a day length trigger, but we're not getting production on Xanthosoma. We are with the taro, so we're just kind of like leaning into the taro. Let's see. So propagation is easy. Potatoes, cold tolerant. It does get tall. This is Brandon, who is tall himself. And then that's the taro at Yana's place. Variety exploration. We did a variety trial last year with 8 different varieties. One of the things that we're noticing that's different with the different cultivars is some of them do score better than others. So some of them start going soft and squidgy pretty early in the season. But we got another variety from Puerto Rico that like just doesn't seem to rot at all. And so in terms of us working with it as a temperate storage crop, that type of trait is really important to us. So as we start going deeper into this, then we'll have varieties that are better suited to our region and not others. So that's kind of ongoing work for us. And then the food side of things, we're always developing the food side. Yeah, Tim?
Is there like a curing process at all for these, like sweet potatoes, or are you just leaving them ground till they're frosted and that's their curing process?
For most of them, we haven't noticed a curing process being relevant. Yakon is the exception. I didn't mention that. If you eat Yakon straight out of the ground, it won't have any of the sweetness. But after a couple of weeks of kind of warm conditions, it develops a lot of its sugars, and that's when the sweetness comes. So Yakon definitely has a sweet potato-like curing process. But that's it really. I mean, we let them dry down. If there's like wounds on them from digging, like standard curing type stuff like that. But it seems like sweet potatoes and Yakon, both of them, the reason you do the curing is to bring out the sugars. It doesn't actually affect storage. So you can store a sweet potato whether it's being cured or not, and it won't affect its longevity. And the same is true of Yakon, it just won't taste as good. So this is just recently, and yesterday, the hop on Merriman still had taro ice cream available. So today could be your last day, tomorrow, I don't know. They did a seasonal special for us where we gave them a bunch of taro, and then we hooked them up with a local farmer that was growing some of our taro, a Way of Life farm, and so we got them enough taro that they were able to do a special run, both a taro ice cream, and then they used it to smear the inside of the glass for a bubble tea. So our taro is available at the hop right now, which I'm very excited about. So that's more of the food side, like how do we get these crops into the food system? And that's been another one of those successful collaborations, because they want to do that seasonal special every year now, and if it's popular, they'll probably want to do more of it. So now a farmer can be selling 50, 100 pounds of taro at $3 a pound to the hop in one go. You know, that's market impact. So we want more of that for sure. Okay, this is, yes?
Want me to answer the question?
Oh, that question? No, you're too keen. Somebody else. This is my riddle. At least let me read it out. What has leaves like spinach, shoots like asparagus, fruits reminiscent of summer squash, large nutty seeds, and a potato-like tuber? If nobody else gets it, then you can go now.
is chayote.
Oh, you stole his thunder.
I was guessing. I didn't hear.
Chayote. Chayote. Good job, Jordan. So, chayote, I'll pass this around. This one, I pulled it out from the basement. It looks like some aphids might have started eating it. But you get the idea. Little chayote. Yeah?
I got some chayote from the woman in the picture last year.
Oh, yeah. This is the leaves.
This is Lee.
Yeah.
She's a very wonderful performer. She's at the West Asheville Farmers Market and some other ones. Anyway, I got it. It requires a very, very, very long growing season. And I had it in a pot, and I kept it in a pot too long before I planted it. And it grew humongous vegetation. We had a very heavy trellis, a industrial strength trellising system.
Uh-huh.
At the end of the season, it pulled the thing down on the ground. Huge amounts of leaves, and you can't eat the leaves.
Uh-huh.
No fruit. We didn't have enough time to fruit. So now, the people I'm growing with, I don't think I can try it again this year because my effort was not fully successful.
Well, you've kind of touched upon, so I don't know if you heard that in the back, but like growing chayote, getting a whole ton of vegetative growth, but no fruit set, is actually one of the most common things I hear when I talk about chayote as feedback. And often, I'm a little bit surprised you had that experience with growing stuff from the leaves because they're growing it regionally as well. But often what we'll hear is that folks have bought chayote at the supermarket and it's sprouted and they've tried growing it and they have that very same experience where a lot of vegetative growth occurs, but it never flowers and sets fruit. And so it's something that's really worth talking about with the tropical crops because it's a common problem. It's one of the things we run into as a challenge with growing tropical crops, because basically a lot of these crops have been developed and grown in the tropical regions for a long time. So that means certain things around length of season and temperature requirements, but often that doesn't seem to be our limiting factor in the mountains. It often gets hot enough and we often have enough time. The thing that seems to hold us back the most is day length. So these crops are, genetically evolved to produce a fruit or a tuber at a certain shortness of day. And often for us at a higher latitude is that we don't hit that shortness of day until mid-November. Like we get 10 hours of day length around about 22nd of November. And so if that 10-hour day length trigger is what the plant needs to set a flower, the plant's already dead by then because it's frost sensitive and we've already had a frost by that point. So if the plant has a genetic day length trigger for either tuber formation or flowering, then we're pretty much screwed, right? There's nothing we can't work with that. There's nothing for us to do. What we need to do is find genetics and basically embark on a breeding project to breed a variety that either has a different day length trigger that's more suited to our season or become day length neutral where it doesn't have a day length trigger at all. And this isn't crazy stuff. I mean, it happened with strawberries. Strawberries used to be a fall crop and now everyone grows day length neutral strawberries. The day length trigger was removed so that we can have strawberries all season. The same thing could happen with chayote. The work hasn't been done on chayote for that to happen. So pretty much every chayote I've tried to grow has failed, apart from this one variety that produces fruit for us in our season. So the hypothesis would be that this one has a day length trigger out of about 13 hours, which allows it to flower for us in mid-August. All the other ones won't flower until after our first frost. And that's true of a lot of things, not just chayote. So chayote is the one that it comes up commonly, but that's probably what's going on with the cassava. The cassava is putting on plenty of vegetative growth to be able to produce fruits, but it's probably got a day length trigger that it won't start forming them until 11 hours, 10 hours, something shorter than what we were able to offer it. So that's the big lesson about the chayote. That said, it's definitely in this top category because this one variety for us works really well. It puts on abundant growth, we get good fruit sets. It's nice to be working with a non-clonally produced crop. That most of these are root crops, right? This is a crop that we're able to grow that is technically a seed crop. You can eat the shoots, you can eat the leaves. It doesn't seem to have the same cucurbit pressures as our common cucurbits, so like the the squash beetle, squash bugs, vine borers don't seem to hit it, so you get a squash-like crop that comes in a little after peak summer squash and a little bit before winter squash, and it fits as a nice little niche in that kind of like August, September period where actually August is a pretty hard farming month. The chayote is just kind of ramping up at that point. So it does work well in our regional system. Little baby chayote. There's a lot of varietal diversity in Central America, which we're not able to grow at this point. And then the cool thing with it is it's actually just a single seed on the inside. So you're seeing that nutty seed on the inside, which is edible. And this, excuse me. This happened a little bit by accident, but I forgot about this in the corner, and I will pass it around, but that's the chayote seed there, which is sprouted and rooted. I actually forgot about this in a bag, and the fruit rotted off, and when I pulled it out, everything was intact apart from this smelly fruit. So I brought it for you. So here's my smelly rotted chayote. But I'm going to plant that and it'll grow and do just fine. And one of the things we found in terms of propagation with this, because it's a little bit restricting in that every fruit we grow we probably want to eat or sell or whatever, but if every fruit will also give us a new plant, so like storing back, it's kind of hard to make that kind of cost-benefit analysis. But what you can actually do with chayote is it does vine vigorously, like this one, if I leave it inside, will grow up my curtains and go all over the house. You can root it out really easily, so you can do stem cuttings on this, or vine cuttings, and root it out in a rooting medium and soil. So like one plant could actually produce a flat of 72, and then we've sold this at the the Herb Festival before because we've been able to do propagation via vine cuttings. So that makes it a little easier to grow and share in terms of having bigger impact.
So you're saying you can't just take the seed out?
You can also do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could
So if
save
you
the
do that,
seed after you eat it?
yeah, you can definitely. Yeah, it's hard to do that if you're going to sell it. But if you're doing that for yourself as a home gardener, then you can definitely do that. Okay, so China's definitely a fun one. I'm going to keep pushing through these top ones, so we've got a little bit of time for the other ones at the end. I'm going to forget if I don't do this now, so let me share this book. If you're intrigued about some of the Andean root crops, so that's Achira, Oka, which we've struggled with and I'll talk about briefly. The Yakon is an Andean root crop. There's one called Mashua, which I'm not going to talk about. But anyway, there's a bunch of Andean root crops. The guy that's like the authority on that in North America is William Whitson. He's done a bunch of breeding work to try and adapt them to North America. He's written this book, which is great, but everything in this book is available on his website as a PDF download. So you can access all the growing guides for all the crops. He's big into potatoes grown from seed as well, true potato seed, if you're interested in that. Anyway, I'm going to pass this around. Yakon specifically, if you want to grow Yakon, he sells about 8 different varieties that work well in North America and is well worth supporting and sourcing from him. So Yakon, he's the guy to go to. And Achira, he's working with Achira as well. So Achira is related to Canna that you see as a kind of like a landscaping plant. That's Canna indica. This is Canna edulus, but you can definitely see the relationship. It grows these tall, beautiful plants. You can see next to my daughter there, just like really, you could grow this just as a landscaping plant, but underneath the ground it grows these large, like really large root masses, which come out looking like this at the end of the season, but there's like loads of them all in a clump and you break them off. So this is a chera, and you can kind of see in terms of that wake up process, this one's beginning to wake up. This growth point, it's swelling a little bit and it's getting ready to send out a little shoot. So each of these growth points could be a new plant. I could break this into 3 different chunks and get a new Achera plant. So that's a chera. I like Achera because it's easy to grow, it's a beautiful plant, it's highly productive. It leans more towards industrial food production because it's known for being an industrial starch crop. It's got one of the largest starch molecules out there of plants, so it's easy to extract the starch. And it is grown like it's called Queensland arrowroot, and in Australia it used to be the largest starch production plant out there. I'm not really that interested in starch production as food, but so we've been looking at this, whether it can be a root vegetable. One challenge at this stage is that it's really fibrous. So if you were to slice it and eat it, I've tried lots of different ways and it's always kind of like, I wish I hadn't done that. So it doesn't taste bad, but it's not, it's just not got good texture. So I've kind of been a little bit like ambivalent about this. I grow it every year to kind of maintain it, but I've been struggling with sliding it into the food system. Taro and Yakon have been easy, but this one's like, But just recently I learned the Chinese name of it, which I actually don't recall to tell you now, but I learned that name, and when I Googled that name, I got a whole bunch of YouTube videos of different ways that they were using it in China, and it kind of re-inspired me. One thing they were doing was planting it really, really dense in these dense beds and coming out and chopping the stem off at about that stage of the middle photograph and then slicing it and using it in stir fries. And so my mind went to like hosta stems and that type of culture where we could use this as a greening vegetable, which was exciting. And then the other thing they were doing, because they grow throughout the season, they grow these big root masses, they seemed to not be waiting until the end of the season to harvest everything. They were maybe the plants were still fairly small, but there was a reasonable root mass, and they were going in with a spade and just slicing off the edges of the plant. So they were leaving most of the plant in the ground and just slicing the edges, and from the video they looked to be like really tender roots. So they were basically eating immature Achera roots that seemed to have not developed the fibers yet, and then they were using it as a tender root crop. So I've not personally experienced either of those two things. I've seen a random YouTube video, I'm inspired, and I'm going to give it a go this year. Because if we can find a good food potential off this, then everything else is already in place in terms of growing, production, propagation, etc. So that's Achera. And then the last one on here, which actually in some way fits into the same category as the Canna edulis, the Achera. There's kind of like a category of tropical root crops that get called arrowroot. There's like a Guinea arrowroot, there's the Queensland arrowroot, which is the Achera, and then this is like arrowroot. So in my mind, I think this is the true arrowroot. But a lot of crops that are just starch producing crops seem to get called arrowroot for some reason. So this one is known to be a starch crop. You can go to Ingles and buy a bag of arrowroot starch. Again, not totally inspired by starch production, but the plant is super pretty. It's in the ginger family and grows pretty small, has these cute little white flowers, is productive and pretty cold tolerant. So you get a lot of root production off it. But again, kind of always had this little limiting factor around using it. Chef Shorty, a pun intended, kind of changed my mind a little bit on that one. She was one of our chefs at our events and really wanted to use the arrowroot. And what she did was we sliced the arrowroot, even though it's fibrous, and dried it and then ground it into a flour. So once it was like pulverized into a flour, then the fibers weren't really an issue. So then we had arrowroot flour, not arrowroot starch. So much easier and quicker to produce than a starch extraction process. And then she took ube flour and she took arrowroot flour and she made these gluten-free, dairy-free cookies. And I swear, like we've done a lot of these events now, and I've never heard anyone talk about one dish so much at an event. Everyone was saying, the cookies, the cookies, the cookies. So much so that I didn't get to try one. Like, they just like disappeared before I could even go and taste one because everyone was going back for more. Luckily, she had enough of the ingredients to then make them and put them on her menu as a special item, and I got one from her restaurant, pun intended. So I was like, oh, okay, people that are doing gluten-free cooking seem to be really impressed with this flour. We have another farmer in the Durham area who has a child who's celiac, and I sent her like 3 or 4 arrowroots 3 years ago, and the first year she just did a small bed and did a lot of gluten-free cooking and was really impressed with it as a flour. The next year she did like a 50-foot bed, and then I think this year she's up to like doing 100 feet of arrowroot. So even though, obviously, and this is the community thing again, right? I hit a brick wall with arrowroot. I'm like, I'm not sure what to do with this, but other people have found ways and have better relationships with it. So we just want to open the door and have everyone else run through it, really. My personal dream with arrowroot was like, I grew up in England, and every time we got sick, my mum would give us arrowroot biscuits. And so I had this memory of arrowroot biscuits, and actually there's like Caribbean medicine about arrowroot being good for the digestion. And I was really excited about it. And after knowing I could grow arrowroot, I went back to England, and I went and found a packet of arrowroot biscuits that's made by McVitie's in Manchester. And I was like, cool, arrowroot biscuits, I'm gonna work out how to make these. And I looked at the ingredients, and it like had 1% arrowroot in it. And I was like, it really saddened me. But so I kind of abandoned my arrowroot biscuit hopes, but then this arrowroot cookie kind of like got me excited again. And usually I'm much more excited about biscuits than cookies. But that's a different conversation. Okay, quickly, this is a little bit tangential, but I like talking about summer greens. Certainly when it comes to tropical summer greens, because generally tropical summer greens like growing in high heat conditions, and we have a kind of like a weird obsession with growing greens that don't like the heat in this area of the world, like kale and lettuce, that just is much better as a winter crop, or at least a fall spring crop, and generally doesn't like the heat. And so we've been looking at different crops that produce like edible greens that don't get decimated by insects, don't need to be sprayed, and actually thrive in the heat. So I've been on that path for a little while, and then I came across this book which is called Edible Leaves of the Tropics, which I like to show people. And the amazing thing with this book is that there's an appendix at the back, and I'll pass this around, but takes me every time. It's got this. Okay, so it's got an appendix, and it's 2 columns of text, very small text. Each line is a separate plant species that represents a species that has edible greens that can be grown in the tropics. So not all of these could be grown where we are, but I bet a lot of them could. And the crazy thing with this book is that there's all of those and all those, and then it just kind of like keeps on going. So there's all those, all these. Every single line in 2 columns is a different species. And I sit there at night reading this book, wondering why the hell we're still growing kale in August. And when there's all these different options we could be eating from. So it just keeps going and going and going and going. So this is like back to that where we started, right? 20,000 edible species, and we're eating kale in August. So I'll pass that around, and there just seems to be like so much we could go at. This is a very small subset of that, where we have southern pea greens, we have moringa, we have squash greens, we have sweet potato greens, we have chaya, we have okra greens. Lots and lots and lots to go at. I'm going to pass around this little stem. This is chaya. I just listened to a podcast this morning about chaya that got me even more excited about it. Apparently it's like one of the highest protein concentrations in any plant. You can't actually see the leaves right now, but that's a stem cutting, so some things we overwinter as stem cuttings, and then we just root those stems out in the spring, and then it grows lots of leafy foliage. I didn't know this about chaya until this morning, but apparently chaya literally never produces a seed, even in the tropics. Often for us, we don't see the seed because we don't have the season to produce the flower, but that's an example of a plant that just doesn't produce a seed. So even in the tropics, it's propagated vegetatively. Yeah.
So, speaking of moringa, is anyone growing moringa in the United States?
Oh, yeah, definitely in the United States. So, yeah, you can grow moringa in the United States. Is somebody else answering the question for me? Go for it.
Oh, I was just saying, because I know she's from Atlanta, I'm from Atlanta, and I was saying it grows really well
Yeah.
in Atlanta. Like, you can throw the seeds down and it just like pops out. It's
So here in the southeast.
yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, especially, I mean, in the summer, summers in Atlanta are so hot, so. Yeah.
There's a farm down, a teaching farm down in southern Florida, Fort Myers, called Echo, and they have, I think, over 100 varieties of moringa. It's one of the epicenters in the world for bringing that here to the United States, and so growing it as an annual, and people are even able to overwinter it in deep mulch in certain areas as well. So, but most people will grow it like an annual.
Yeah, and that book, The Edible Leaves of the Tropics, is an Echo published book, so they got a lot of good research on their site.
Yeah, and a seed bank, incredible seed bank too.
Yeah, they're good people. Okay, I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of like whistle. Like we've covered the crops that I really wanted to cover as like kind of the core crops. I've got a few other ones that I want to touch on, and then we can kind of close it out. Did someone say bless you or ask a question? I'm going crazy. I do want to talk about ube. I should have updated my slides a little bit. Ube really should be getting onto the top list because look, this is what we grew last year and it's kind of cool. And this is like deep purple all the way through. It's it's got a lot of Filipino culinary culture behind it. I can pass that around. It's a yam. I think of it as a true yam in the Dioscorea genus. I think there's about 8 edible yams out there. And this one is more of an Asian origin yam. There's some African yams, there's some Caribbean yams that we're starting to work with, but this is the one we've been working with the longest. The reason why it started on this isn't we can definitely grow it here. What we were struggling with was propagating it here, and not even just propagating it, because you can see this one's already sprouting, so it propagates fairly easily. We couldn't do like expansive propagation because it randomly sprouts from different points on the yam. It's not always predictable, and we were struggling to do stem cuttings on it or vine cuttings on it. And we were getting like real low success rates on rooting out the vines. So I've never really been able to share this one very widely. Everybody wants this one, but I've never been able to share it because generally we plant a row, we get that row back, and that's our planting material for next year. We're just kind of like never getting bigger like we do with the other ones. But just a few weeks ago, some folks at NC State sent me a propagation protocol on yams that gave like specific heat and humidity specs on rooting out vine cuttings. So I'm gonna try that this year, and if I can successfully root out vine cuttings, because in the basement it'll send up vines that are like meters long. If I can root them out, then I'll be able to share it widely, and we'll be game on for the yam, because it's a real cool crop that grows large underground roots and has a lot of popular culinary cuisine behind it in terms of, primarily African and Asian cuisines have a lot of yam in their diets. So ube should change, and that's a picture of the ube that was grown in Western North Carolina in Jamie's hands there. We touched on moringa. Moringa was here because actually I've been struggling to root out stem cuttings of moringa. Moringa should be the same as chaya in that you can grow it, get vegetative growth. We don't get seeds here, but then you should be able to overwinter stem cuttings. And mine were always rotting out. I've just learned recently that they don't like being stored in water or being rooted out in water. So I think I can now change my production practice on moringa. So moringa and ube should change. Oca, I won't even talk about oca. Some people have managed to grow it, but in very small settings. And we've already talked about cassava as a limiting factor that I really want to get past, but I'm going to struggle with until that day length trigger is moved. Sugarcane, I've got on there, which definitely grows here. You can grow sugarcane. It sprouts, it's easy to carry over the winter. I've got it on this lower list just because like sorghum is easier and more productive to grow, and so I'm like, I'd prefer to support a local sorghum industry than a marginal sugarcane industry and leave sugarcane to warmer areas for now. Okay, so that's my kind of like next step, but even beyond what we've covered today, which feels like quite a lot, there's like, again, so many species, so many things to go at, and really it's just a case of like asking the question, oh, I wonder if you can grow it, finding some starter material and giving it a go. That's our whole methodology, which I've now shared with you, and you know, if you guys are trying something else or got curiosities, then that's where we can be in community and conversation and keep bringing new stuff into the food system. Thank you very much.
Do you sell
I will address that question because it comes up. The question was, do we sell and ship stuff? It's one of the challenges. I talked about that multi-stakeholder approach. It's not just about getting people to grow it and getting people to eat it. It's how do we have like a supply chain to get farmers the stock to be able to grow it in the first place. Easy with seeds is because they're so abundant, harder with this stuff where you basically need a nursery industry behind the taro or the Yakon. We don't have the capacity to do that. We've just set up the Appalachian Seed Growers Collective, which I think is going to grow sweet potato slips this year, and I think it might be able to be a nursery outlet for some of these things. Maybe sow true seed, like Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is selling turmeric now. So it's part of the conversation. I don't have great answers for sourcing apart from the places like Cultivariable that are already selling Yakon. And then like, you know, folks like Noah that's got the taro for sale and just slowly getting it more grassroots into the food system until we start getting nursery trade up and running. So we're working on it, is my best answer. Yeah.
Thank you.